Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 Worst Episodes of Star Trek. And this video is part of a series of videos where I name my top 10 least favorite, or although other way to put it, top 10 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion. This video is where I'm going to get into my number 3 worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. So now we are getting down to the nitty gritty here. We're getting down to my top 3. Now, with this top 10 so far, as I mentioned in previous videos, coming up in this top 10 was actually quite hard because there are some really terrible bad episodes of the Star Trek franchise. I mean, we're talking about over like 600 episodes and whatnot. And there's a lot of, even though I love all these Star Trek shows, there's a lot of bad episodes. So narrowing it down to just 10 was really difficult, and is really like splitting hairs, because in a lot of these cases, with every episode I'd named so far in my top 10, like, I could change it. Maybe I could, do if my mood changed, or if I watch the episode again, or if something else happens and I think differently. Maybe I actually put that episode at like number 20 instead of number 7 or number, because there's just so many bad episodes. I could, swap them around with depending on how I feel. Like if I do this countdown, like 4 or 5 years from now, I might have a totally different order, totally different episodes in my top 10 worst. But here's the thing, this is why I bring this up now. My top 3 I'm very solid on. Like, some of these other episodes I watched, I thought, maybe I shouldn't have this on here. Maybe that shouldn't be so high. Or maybe there's this other episode I forgot that should be higher than this episode. But with this top 3, I have none of those doubts. No doubts whatsoever. These are definitely the absolute 3 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. So anyway, let me get to my number 3 worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, and that is Sub Rosa, which is episode 14 of season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, I have been on the record as saying that I actually really like season 7 Next Generation. A lot of people love to shit on it and says, oh, this is where the show went downhill and the writers ran out of ideas. In fact, people love the quote, the writers themselves, who said that they kind of feel like they were running out of ideas. And I disagree. I think there's a lot of great episodes in season 7. I think there's a lot of good that comes out of season 7, and I've been on the record saying that I actually prefer season 7 to most of the other seasons of Star Trek Next Generation. It might even be my 3rd favorite season, although it's kind of tied between that and season 4. But point is, I do like season 7, but this episode sucks. Now, most people would point to this episode as a reason why season 7 sucks, which I don't think is fair, because I don't think this episode's representative in season 7. And the fact that it actually happens in season 7, sure, but there's some terrible episodes and some other good seasons, so I don't think that really has anything to do with it. Now, doing my research on this episode, I couldn't find any specific worst list that this was named for, but it was second to the bottom on IMDb's rated list for Star Trek Next Generation. Number 1 being Shades of Grey, which was also very strongly considered for my 10 worst list. In fact, when I personally did my own top 10 worst episodes of Star Trek, Shades of Grey was number 1, and this, I believe, was number 2. So I'm kind of swapping that around now to have Sub Rosa be the worst. Now, here's the thing. As I said, I'm absolutely deadpan certain that this is the 3rd worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I'm fixated on that. Now, part of the reason why I mentioned before why I'm kind of lucid with where I rank different things, it was hard to rank, because funnily enough, there's like different criteria of worst. It's like, what exactly do you mean by worst? Like, there's different ways you could define worst. Like, I covered episodes like Precious Cargo, which it was my number 4, and there's my number 1, which I haven't gotten to yet, and a couple other episodes that I covered on my top 10 worst already. That are actually very annoying to watch. Like, it's very like painful to watch. Like, I think it's so terrible that it's like torture watching it, and I'd rather like just not watch that episode ever again in my life. But then there's episodes like this one, and my number 2, which I'll get to next week, that I actually do. It's not really torture to watch. I mean, it kind of was a little bit, but there's some entertainment value, and it's so bad it's good. Now, personally, I've never been a fan of the it's so bad it's good. I know some people just love watching all the crappy, Ed Wood movies of The Room and stuff like that, and I've just never been into that. Like, to me, I don't know, something, there's like a cruel element to it, or an unfeeling element to that, to just this piece of art that a lot of people, or piece of shit, but it's a piece of art that a lot of people put their blood, sweat, and tears into, and just sit there and just laugh at it and make fun of it. I don't know, something about that seems a bit cruel to me, particularly when it comes to The Room, even though The Room has made Tommy Wiseau famous, and now he kind of owns the fact. But he always, if you notice, he always tries to deflect and say it's a comedy rather than just a piece of shit film. Now, so, and I don't know, I just never personally gotten any enjoyment out of that. But I must admit to getting some out of watching this episode, and it's going to be even more so when I get to my number 2. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is more of a recent turn of events, because when I first saw this episode, when it first came out, I didn't like it. I don't think I instantly recognized it as one of the worst episodes of the show. I think it took me a lot longer for that part of it to sink in, but I definitely didn't like it. I'm definitely like, this is stupid. But here's the thing, getting back to my criteria on deciding the 10 worst episodes, I think what I ultimately landed at is not whether or not I feel it betrayed the show that it belonged to, such as Endgame, which is why that was only number 7, not number 1, or like how torturous it is to watch, which is why Precious Cargo was number 2, or how painful it is. I think I'm judging it like, or like, do I get any entertainment out of it? Because in that case, my number 2 would probably not be on my top 10 worst list, because I get a lot of entertainment out of how terrible that episode is. But what I ultimately decided on is in terms of craft, and I think that makes the most sense. Like, regardless of whether or not the result, my emotional response is to be like, this is either like Turnabout Intruder, is like, this is offensive, or something like, Precious Cargo, where it's like, it's torture, just torture me, I'll tell you all my secrets, just don't let me stop watching this piece of shit episode, it's painful to watch. Or something like this, where it's just like, it's comical how terrible this episode is. So I figured it was not fair to judge on any one of those criteria, but sort of to add that all together to like just how well written, or how terribly written in this case, and terribly put together, acted, production value, all that sort of thing. And when I come to that, I think this and my number 2, which I'll get to next week, definitely, most certainly deserve to be in the top 3 shining examples of worst episodes. So I'm trying to look at everything all together, even though these episodes aren't as painful, although this episode is kind of painful to watch too, to be perfectly honest. Even though there's some moments, some scenes that amused me, most of it I was just like, oh my god, Can I turn this off? Now, here's the thing. So, it's funny going behind the scenes in this episode because even though it is, as I said, the third lowest rated or second, lowest rated episode of Next Generation on IMDb. And apparently it has garnered a reputation for being a terrible episode. There was another YouTube channel, I watched a YouTube video, where they only reviewed 3 episodes of the Star Trek franchise, or 4, I think. No, they did 5. They did 1 from each original series, Next Generation. They did more later on. But anyway, they started with just 5, and they picked the worst of each series, and this YouTuber said that she asked her audience for what is the worst episode of each series, and they came up with Sub Rosa for Next Generation. So I'm not alone and really hating this episode, and I personally have heard this episode brought up a lot in conversations of worst of Next Generation. But the funny thing is, there's still defenders of this episode in the writing staff. Now, most of these terrible episodes, at least the ones that are generally considered terrible, not just my opinion, like Bada Bing, Bada Bang. I'm sorry, I think everyone else is wrong with that. Saying, oh, it's okay, or it's decent, it's good. No, that's a total piece of shit that absolutely belongs in anyone's top 10 worst list. But I'm not in the majority opinion on that, even though I will fight to the death on that one. But the episodes that I am in the majority opinion on, that like made the worst list of the convention they did in Las Vegas, like Precious Cargo, and The Way to Eden, and that I'm not alone on. This is the first one I came across where the writers don't admit that it sucks. Like the stuff like Precious Cargo and The Way to Eden, and a few other episodes on my my About a Night in Sick Bay, I think, is another example. Like, I always find examples of people who were involved in this episode, or in the episode, saying that, yeah, they hate it, it sucks, and it was a disaster. But the funny thing is about this episode, some of the writers defend it. Ronald D. Moore defended this episode, said that he liked it. Now, Ronald D. Moore, I like him. He wrote some of the best episodes of Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. He was an intricate part of why the last 2 seasons of Next Gen were so good and why Deep Space Nine's final seasons were so good. And he went on to do Battlestar Galactica, which was a pretty great show. But he also went on to do The Outlander, which totally sucked. And in fact, this episode kind of reminds me a bit of The Outlander. Now, granted, this episode is much worse than The Outlander. I will grant it for any fans of The Outlander not to get too pissed off at me for that. But I think it kind of makes sense that Ronald D. Moore would like this if he could get involved in such a crappy show. But also, the Jerry Taylor, who apparently was the one who really fought for this episode to get made and greenlit it, and I think she wrote a different draft of it. There was another woman who I don't have her name in front of me who came up with the original idea, but she, I think, was responsible for tightening this episode up, and she defends this episode. And in fact, I believe it was her or someone else involved in the writing staff of Next Gen who said that that generally speaking, that this episode of whether or not you like it is decided by gender lines. Like, men hate this episode and women typically love this episode. Now, I referenced that YouTube channel that was a woman YouTuber, and she hated, well, I wouldn't say hated this episode, she liked making fun of it. She said it was absolutely, I think Movie Night is the name of the YouTube channel if you're curious. But anyway, she loved making fun of this episode and said it was absolutely terrible. And I've heard a lot of it, like, if it's like second worst in IMDb, I'm sure a fair amount of women hate it too. And I've heard a lot of people from women, from women who hate this episode too. So I In fact, yeah, I knew. Yeah, I had a friend once who thought this episode was actually a piece of shit. She was a woman, so I don't think that's true. I think she's fooling herself there, especially saying, "Oh, it's split on whether what your gender is depends on whether or not you like this episode." I think that's total horseshit. To be frank. Now, granted, this episode is kind of ripping off a romance novel, so it's geared more towards women. But it's not like, oh, I'm a man, I hate stuff geared towards women, which might apply more to Outlander, to be fair. But in this case, it's just terrible. It's terribly written, and it is horribly written. So I think that is total horseshit. Now, there were some negative voices, though. There was Nareen Shankar, who diplomatically stated that he did not like this episode. And there was also Gates McFadden, of course, the star of this episode, Dr. Crusher, who, and apparently in a convention in 2012, stated that she really wished this episode didn't exist, and she didn't like it. So, there is that. Now, we're talking about the critical response. I did forget to mention there was also Screen Junkies, if you know this popular YouTube channel that does honest trailers. They did an honest trailer for Star Trek Next Generation. They made sure to have a whole section about this episode and just how terrible it is. And in fact, Dan Murrell, who was mostly responsible for that honest trailer, on his own YouTube channel more recently, he did a list of Star Trek Next Generation episodes that he recommends watching, particularly for those who haven't seen Next Generation before. And at the end of that video, he mentions this episode he says it's been worth watching because it's so terrible, and he refers to it as the worst episode of the show. Which I think is... it's actually quite appropriate. So, why do I think this episode is so terrible? Well, the funny thing is, before I get really into that, the funny thing is that when this episode was pitched by the writer who I mentioned before, whose name I can't recall, Rick Berman and Michael Piller didn't want to do it. They thought they thought it would be ridiculous. They thought it was like a silly romance novel, and it's not something that Star Trek should do. But Jerry Taylor's the one who overruled them, saying that Star Trek should try something new. And that's basically Michael Piller and Rick Berman were 100% correct. And that is a very rare thing where I can say that Rick Berman was right. Now, it does happen, obviously. Like, he ran Star Trek in the 90s, and Star Trek in the 90s is great, so he must have done some things right, but most of the times I hear about executive decisions that he made or overruled, I totally and completely disagree with him. Like, for example, he pretty much destroyed Voyager because every time they wanted to do anything with continuity or long-term story arcs, anything with lasting consequences, he shot them down. And of course, Enterprise was his brainchild, but anyway, particularly those first two seasons. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not a fan of Rick Berman, but hey, even that broken clock is right twice a day. And he was totally right. This time it was Jerry Taylor who was completely in the wrong for suggesting this, because it is a silly, cheesy romance novel, like a trashy romance novel, not like a good one. And it's the bad version of that because they're trying to inject it into Next Generation, and it makes no sense. So this is the episode to which Dan Murrell and I believe the Movie Nights YouTube channel as well referred to as the episode where Dr. Crusher bangs a space ghost. No, yeah, because I realized I didn't give the proper synopsis for this episode, so you might be like, well, what happened in this episode? Well, Crusher bangs a space ghost. That's basically it. That's all you need to know. It's stupid! Alright, so it begins with the funeral of Crusher's grandmother. They go to a planet that tries to emulate Scotland. It has an artificial weather system purposely to emulate the weather of Scotland. Yeah, you gotta convince me a place like that would exist. Hell no. But anyway, so they have a lot of these Scottish stereotypes in here. The most hilarious one is the old dude who burst into Crusher's house. Well, because she took over her grandmother's house, her deceased grandmother's house, and while she's just chilling out, relaxing, he just burst in without knocking. And it starts yelling at her to try to take the candle away, and he's like, "Dinner, light that candle, and dinner, go to that house. Dinner, light the candle, don't light the candle." And the funny thing is when referencing movie nights. Video on this I thought was hilarious because they like showed the clips of all the scenes of him just repeating that over and over again, saying "dinner, light the candle," and playing like bagpipe music in the background. This is so stereotypically cliche, over the top Scottish. It's a bit ridiculous. And here's a little bone to pick I have. So basically the premise of the episode, there's this candle and some energy being that feeds off of like the energy of women lives in that candle, and basically he's been passed on for generations within Dr. Crusher's family. We find out her maiden name in this episode is Howard. So it's passed, and they keep talking about how all the Howard women keep passing on this candle, and they keep passing on the Ronin guy. Now here's a quick question I have. They're portraying this as like a traditional Scottish family that keeps up like old times classic Scottish traditions, and as far as Ronin claims to be around ever since like the 16th century. So why does he keep referring to Howard women in the Howard clan? Because if they're keeping Scottish tradition, wouldn't every time a woman marries change her name? And I'm sure maybe some of the women had children out of wedlock, which, you know, no judgments from me, of course, but I doubt everyone did. So some of them had to get married, and if they get married, they would change their name. Now again, I got nothing wrong with men taking on women's name in marriage. I'm all for that. But if this is, again, classic traditional Scottish family, especially in like the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, even 20th century, that wasn't really done. So it's hard for me to buy. And plus Crusher. Like, that's why her name is Crusher, because she married someone else who had the last name Crusher. In this episode, they tried to retcon by calling her Beverly Howard Crusher, which she was never referred to as before. But regardless, like, all of our ancestors, like, they wouldn't keep that. So they keep referring to the Howard women, but it's like the last name would probably constantly change. But you know, that's just a little nitpick I have. It's there's definitely a lot worse about this episode. It's a cheesy romance novel because Dr. Crusher basically is being sexually assaulted by an energy field comes in the middle of the night, and the scenes with Gates McFadden's in there acting like she's having sex with like nothing there, and there's like an energy, you see this green energy go inside her, and she's like, yeah, Dr. Crusher bangs a space ghost. That's basically what it is. So, but I say sexually assaulted because she's like, this happens without her will. It happens while she's sleeping one night, and she's acting like she likes it. And she's like, oh, isn't this so sexy? Ooh, I want more. And she goes from being normal to being like completely obsessed and under this ghost's control, like, flat. Like, all of a sudden, she, like, is willing to, like, kill people, willing to do anything in order to keep Ronan in her life, who, by the way, the actor who plays him is the same guy who plays Shakar. So when they had that funeral scene at the start of the episode where they show Ronan at the grandmother's funeral, I was like, hey, what's Shakar doing at her grandmother's funeral? But anyway, so yeah, so she instantly turns mad and is obsessed with with the space ghost, and all of a sudden goes up to, like, resigns, just leaves a thing on Captain Picard's desk saying he's resigning, and she goes to transporter room to beam down the planet, not even talk to anyone, didn't even say I'm resigning, didn't tell anyone about it. She's in plain clothes, and she's like, okay, beam me down. Picard's like, whoa, hold up, what is this about you resigning? Can you explain? She's like, I think it's pretty straightforward, it's all in there, energize. And Picard's just like, whoa, like that. And you know, I know the excuse this episode gives is that, oh, she's under control of the space ghost. Ooh. but it's silly. It's like she instantly, like, became this, like, completely 100% brainwashed person, and then towards the end of the episode, she all of a sudden, like, when Picard's life is in danger, now she cares about Picard like the all before. Like, she knew that the space ghost killed the in order to go to that Hoos guy. Then now that they killed him, so why does she care all of a sudden? Dinner to light that candle, and dinner to go to the Hoos. But anyway, the candle. But anyway, sorry. But anyway. Sorry, and just to be clear, if any Scottish viewers, I'm not making fun of Scottish accents, I'm making fun of this guy's accent, because it's over the top, it's ridiculous, and this whole episode is really stupid, but anyway, sorry. So, yes, I don't buy that, and even before that, when Crusher first meets the space ghost, I have this scene that's trying to play it off like a horror, where Crusher is like, who's there, and he just pops up in the mirror, like she can see him in the mirror but not like there. She turns around, he's not there, and she drops the mirror. They're playing it like a horror, like someone is, like, haunting her, and then she has sex with them, and then all of a sudden is in love with them, with the ghost. Ooh. And they keep saying, that's the other thing, that dinner I go to the Hoos guy kept saying there was a ghost. It's a ghost. And I'm like, that is so dumb. Okay, on top of, and you can see how ridiculous this is and why there's some enjoyment to be had from that. This is so terrible. That's actually a little entertaining to watch. Now, also, like, if you watch my channel, you know I'm not, like, a huge fan of Gates McFadden. I don't think she's a terrible actress, but it seems to me whenever, like, they focus more on her, like episodes like Remember Me, like her bad acting just shows up more, and it definitely, most certainly, is the case in this episode. In this episode, her acting is terrible. I mean, just like the scenes when she was being haunted by the ghost, she's like, who's there? Show yourself right now. I mean it. And the way she says it sounds so fake and insincere. It sounds like an amateur actor, like reading lines. Like, that's not how people would talk. And on top of that, a lot of the lines in this episode are just ridiculous and over the top. And again, I gotta reassert, a lot of people like to attack Marina Sirtis as a bad actor, which I completely disagree with. I think she's actually a really good actress, and I think you can tell because in this episode, the scenes with her and Crusher, like, they're both giving terrible, horrible lines, and Gates McFadden totally botches them, but Marina Sirtis at least tries. You can tell she's trying to, she almost sells it until you listen to the words that she's saying and see how horribly written this thing. And the whole thing about Picard, like when Crusher's first telling you about his grandmother being involved with a 30-year-old man, Picard's like, oh, no. And it's I don't know. And then Picard's like overprotective, and he's like, I want to meet this Ronin, and whatever. And it's just okay. So on top of all this, you got Data and Geordi looking for the source of this energy that's causing the weather to malfunction, and that perfect Scottish weather. But anyway, they're looking for the source of it, and they track it down to the grave of Crusher's grandmother, and that's when like she comes to life. It's Ronin inhabiting her, but still, she comes to life, and like her eyes are blue, and she like shoots electricity out of her, and Dana and Geordi go, okay, that is just as terrible as one of the worst, like, whatever horrible B movie you can think of. I mean, I gotta pause here for a second to reiterate the people like Jerry Taylor and Ronald D. Moore who were insisting that this is a decent episode. Like, what drugs are they taking, and can I have some? I mean, why in the right mind? Who could take this episode seriously? I mean, come on. How could anyone get any entertainment value out of this episode other than mocking it and laughing at it for being so over the top ridiculous? And again, you get some of that great Gates McFadden acting where she she chews the scenery over the top when Vernon's controlling the grandma. You got the granny going with electricity shooting out of her hands and her eyes all blue, and Crusher shows up and she's like, "You're not Nana! Leave me alone!" Oh my god, this episode is amusing. Okay. So. And why, I don't buy, like, her heel turn all of a sudden to, like, loving the fact that she's being, molested by the green energy field, to all of a sudden, like, screaming at it and, leave it alone! But anyway, sorry, I'm gonna lose my shit here. But anyway, so she gets the smart idea, which is what she should have done in the first place, as that, Mr. Scottish warned her earlier. You gotta get the condyle, and she takes the phaser and destroys the condyle. And so he's stuck, and she's like, ha ha ha! And the grin, terrible Gates McFadden acting style says, "That's it! You have no place left to go." And he's like, "Oh, I have one place I can go," and starts to charge towards her, and she's like, "Don't do it, get away from me," and then shoots him with the phaser, and he reacts in pain, and he charges at her again, and she shoots him again, and he vaporizes. Now, I thought this guy was a green vapor of smoke, of this green gas, like electric smoke thing. First of all, how can he be hit by a phaser? If he's like this gas smoke thing, he could, like, contort his mass so that the phaser beam just goes right through him. That's how these energy beings usually work in Star Trek. And couldn't he just, like, fuck off and vaporize instead of charging at Crusher? I mean, he said, he needs to go somewhere, and he needs to go into Crusher, because I explained later in the episode it's the Howard women, don't get me started on that, but the whole Howard women have this specific kind of DNA that he needs. But why didn't he just vaporize, go into the ground, and then attack Crusher from behind, where she couldn't do anything, and the phaser, I'm sorry, but the phaser should have no effect on him. He's a green cloud. What is he still doing in humanoid form? Why is he still Shakar? Should go back to Bejor and start being the Prime Minister, the First Minister. I know that came out after this episode, but still. What a terrible episode. And I can't even remember what the coda was. It was something stupid with Picard and Crusher, I think. But yeah, so throughout this episode, Crusher's basically being molested by green smoke, and Troy's like, "Oh, I wish I could be molested by green smoke too." And it's the worst kind of cheesy. I'm sorry, I compare it to a cheesy romance novel, but most cheesy romance novels are better than this. This is like the worst kind of trashiest, lowest common denominator. This is the Sharknado level, room level, or the room, I should clarify, level quality of story we got going here. And Jerry Taylor thinks that this episode is popular amongst women. No. It's not popular amongst anyone except for people who love so bad it's good stories, because I just had to put it in my top 3 worst of the entire Star Trek franchise, because this is a huge low that they actually went this low, this crazy, ridiculous, retconning Crusher's backstory, having her act completely out of character, and it's littered with Gates McFadden, this terrible acting, and they have a ridiculous story about a green smoke thingy that takes the form of a First Minister of Bejor, and who Crusher likes getting molested by. My rating for Sub Rosa out of 10 is a 1. The worst. This episode is terrible. I mean, it is definitely deserving of the top 3 worst of the worst, because there's simply no redeeming qualities on this episode. It's so over the top, everything about it. This is what I talked about at the top of the video. The acting, the construction, the script, the production value, like everything about this episode is absolutely terrible. And so the only thing I have to say about it is dinner to go to the house, and dinner I like the candle. Anyway, that's it. That's all I gotta say about this giant piece of shit. As I said, these top 3 are the ones I am most certain about deserve to be here. So I'll be back next week for another, I get into my top 2. My number 2. Here we go, another masterpiece here of the worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. You can also check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as many more videos on other shows like The Expanse, Lower Decks, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching. Dinner to go to the house.